The different seasons, depending on where you live of course, can pose very different challenges. In the wintertime, it's cold. In the spring, a little inconsistent. You don't know if it's going to be hot or cold. There's usually lots of rain. Although it's beautiful. In the summer, the opposite of the winter. Incredibly hot. And then in the fall, you've got all those leaves falling. Not to mention these guys. Pine cones. Everywhere. And while sometimes it's fun to kick one about, why not get more creative with it? Well, David from David's Wood Turning certainly did decide to do that, using them to create an incredible pine cone and resin hybrid vase. But the first thing he did, toast them a little bit, and then shave them down to the sizes he wanted to work with. From there, time to glue them into the form. Those flat faces facing outward. Just think of how hard it would have been to try to glue these in place if they were still entirely rounded. And once he had laid them in and allowed that glue to set, well then, guess what comes next? That's right, the epoxy resin. Of course, that glue's got to harden, then a special case put in the middle, essentially another pouring container, that'll help to create the overall shape. Plenty of tape laid over top to keep those pine cones, if they dislodge, from rising up and floating out. Then it's time to mix that resin, and a special mix for this one, because mixed in will not only be the colors blue and yellow, but a little mica powder as well, which creates an absolutely stunning, almost glittering effect, like you might see in the best of bowling balls. And once that was mixed up, and the color and powder looked just right, they were allowed to set for 5 hours before actually being poured into the mold. And that to try to prevent the colors from mixing and blending into one color that obviously would be a giant green vase. From there into the pressure pot for a few days, and take a look at what emerges. It takes a little doing to get it out of there. Tapping away that central container, and then carefully loosening the outside before just going for it and carving it away. The base as well. And no, it's not done at this point. Now it's time for a little sanding on the base to make it easier to mount to the lathe. Any of the excess pine cone that did float out was then carved up, carved off, and it was time to start turning. That is after the glue sets yet again. This is a project that requires patience and some special tools. In this case, a carbide tool called a negative rake, used to help avoid any chipping out, especially from those pine cones. Of course, being naturally fibrous, those tools could easily scrape them and cause them to rip from the actual form. Fortunately, that minimized. Still, carefully turning, taking a look after every few passes. Other tools used as well, of course, different skews to smooth out that outside before some sanding is done. And every time a little sanding is done, a little sanding sealer applied. First wipe down to make sure there's no dust or particulate that could be caught on the surface underneath, and then take a look at that, just a preview of what's to come. Now to clean out that inside, and another delicate procedure. Not wanting to carve those walls too thin, since it could cause one of those pine cones to be pressed out from the inside, and you can see them on the inside very clearly as well. An amazing look at those cross sections. Now you really get an appreciation for why he actually glued them the way he did after cutting them down, to make them all particularly visible and really add to that dazzling, almost mesmerizing effect. A little more sanding on the inside, cleaned up and sealed one more time before it's on to some micro polish pads, a little wet micro polishing, and a little Yorkshire grit to bring out the best in this piece. How beautiful is this finish, now being removed with a parting tool, and of course, a few of those steps need to be repeated on the vase. Cleaned up, sanded down, micro-polished, and a little more Yorkshire grit applied. You can see the yellow and blue did start to mix just a little bit where they met. Unavoidable, but still plenty of those two original colors there. And in fact, the mixing just adds to the stunning finish of this hybrid pine cone and resin vase. Beautiful like only David from David's Wood Turning could pull off.